Hello, good evening. I hope all of you have had a good day. Sorry, I was running a little late. Um, yeah, I hope all of you had a good day. If not, this is more of me nerding out than usual. I've been this way for a couple of books, but I will say this one in particular is very much a me nerding out, and already my tracking is going funky. Hang on a second. Is that better? I think that's better. Okay. Um, so this one will be a lot of nerding out. I will need to give you all a disclaimer regarding my bias because I did come into this with a lot of bias. And some additional comments because this one was an ebook. And I'll explain why I did it that way in just a moment. But today is, I believe, a new taker of the crown of longest title because, of course, it is. But today we are doing the short version of the title is The Nine Eyes of Lucien. The long version is Critical Role, The Mighty Nine, The Nine Eyes of Lucien. Let me start this, and then we will get into where the bias comes in. It's going to come in really quick, but we can get it started. As per usual, this is meant to entertain and inform. I do not hold the rights to the works described, and I hope you enjoy. So it is a Critical Role, The Mighty Nine, The Nine Eyes of Lucien, by Madeleine Roux. Fun fact, I knew how to spell The Mighty Nine, and every time I had to type 9 for 9 eyes, I tried to type 9. Like, no, like The Mighty Nine. But yes, so that was a fun fact. Let's get a little further and then we will cover some of the weirdness for me. May not be weirdness for others. So your publishing details, it was published in 2022 by Del Rey. It was published, I think it's through Gilmore? Hang on, let me make sure what Critical Role's imprint is. Del Rey is the big publisher, but it's, yeah, Gilmore's Glorious Goods is the Critical Role part. It is technically not part of a series, but it does take place in the same world of Exandria as all of the current Critical Role media. So, no direct sequels or prequels in novel form, but I discussed Kith and Kin last year. Same dealio. You're going to see a lot of the same comments made about this not on this slide. In a couple of slides. So this is the original cover art by Matt Hubel. Hubel? I think it's Hubel, who is a VFX artist and illustrator who has worked on multiple video games. He also does fan art of multiple video games. So he's done Critical Role official art like this. He's done fan art. He's done. I don't know if his Mercy art was fan art or like official, but he has done stuff like that. He's worked on multiple video games. It's pretty even when it's grim, so take that as you will. And this is Lucien. So here's where my bias comes in. I listened to this as an audiobook because I had listened to the other Critical Role as an audiobook because I knew that Critical Role reprised their roles in their audiobooks. So Robbie Daymond is once again your narrator, which was wonderful and delightful, and I kind of adored him as a narrator. And Matthew Mercer was Lucien. Amongst everybody else. So, welcome to Lady Chrysius Has a Bias. That bias is Critical Role. I adore the Mighty Nine. I adore Campaign 2. These people are my people, and I love them dearly, and I love them to death, and I love all of their flaws, and I acknowledge that some of them have terrible, horrible flaws. So, all of the Mighty Nine's voice actors are here as the Mighty Nine. Matthew Mercer reprises, I think, all of the NPCs he voiced in the campaign. Because some of them show up in this. Robbie is the generic narrator and everybody else. Unlike Kith and Kin, where Robbie was doing roughly 90% of the talking, with Vixalia and Vaxeldan, or Laura Bailey and Liam O'Brien doing the other bit, the other 10% carrying. This is almost 60% is Robbie, 40% is Matt, and everybody else gets 10%. And even then, that's probably generous for them. But there's a bunch of them. So if you like the cast and crew of Critical Role, they're all here. That's why everyone's here, guys. The voices you'll hear the most are Robbie and Matthew Mercer. So about the author, Madeline Rue is a New York Times best-selling author. She has written in the worlds of Star Wars and WoW, in addition to several series of her own. Doing a quick bit of Google foo on those series, since I haven't read any of them. They all seem creepy. I absolutely understand why she got tapped for this book. Also, I was correct to read it in Spooky Month, because, oh boy. But so she has several series of her own that all seem to give creepy vibes. I can't really give an opinion about them, because, ironically, I don't read creepy. Like, it's not what I choose to read. This is an anomaly because I love the Mighty Nine and Critical Role. So what do you need to know? First thing here, if you didn't pay attention to the description of this particular stream, it says it's a very spoilery talk. There will be spoilers past this slide. It is a single perspective. It has time skips that primarily go forward, and it is fairly dark. Now, for all of you who don't watch or listen to Critical Role, for those of you who just are like, hey, cool purple dude on a book, would I like it? Well, I've got a couple of questions for you. Do you like what is essentially an adventure story? Do you like it being in the head of your main character? Because it is very much in that space. Those are the two big ones. It's a without going into spoilers, both for the book and for the campaign, it is an adventure story. It is very much a dark adventure story, but it is an adventure story. Do I think you need to understand Critical Role and Campaign 2 and anything? No, I don't. I really don't. Much like where Kith and Kin went out of its way to be self-contained, this has also gone out of its way to be a self-contained story. You don't need to know all of the ties and threads that it is throwing out and tying down. If you do, that's a fun Easter egg. Sorry about that. Hang on a second. Fun times. Sorry. If you do understand all of those threads, fantastic, wonderful bonus Easter eggs. If you don't, anything that you desperately need to know, it fills you in on. Anything that you're like, that seems important, but it's not its own thread and it doesn't truly get resolved, it probably ties into the campaign and was resolved in a different perspective. So, there are spoilers past this slide. If you do not want spoilers for Critical Role Campaign 2, The Mighty Nine, turn back now. You can still read and enjoy this book, and that'll all be great. If you don't want the animated series that is in the works and will be coming out at some point in the relatively near future, I think. I need to check up on that again. I know Vox Machina is coming out right now, but I think The Mighty Nine is kind of more on the way than it has been. But if you don't want spoilers for any of that, that's fine. You can read the book without spoilers for that, for the most part. You can probably read about the first two-thirds to three-fourths of the book without any, like, campaign-wide spoilers. Or you can go watch the campaign, or you can wait for the animated series, or you can just read the book if you'd like. All of these things are valid. If you really don't care about Critical Role, and you don't care about spoilers, and you don't care about me just kind of going off the deep end and talking about how much I adore these characters in general, and some in particular, cool, stick around. I would love to have you. So, Here's where the spoilers begin. Please go away if you don't want spoilers. Your main character is Lucien. He is a wonderfully slow fall villain protagonist. He has family issues. He is proud. He is everything that modern day pop culture portrays Lucifer as. Yes, that is basically Lucien all wrapped up in a package. He is a villain protagonist by the end. He doesn't start that way. This is the fall. This is the, and how did we get to this place? I adore Molly Mock. So, spoilers. I adore Molly Mock. I adore how flawed Molly Mock was as a character. And I just kind of appreciate his dynamic with the group. So seeing where it all started, and then seeing where it goes from his perspective beyond it, because this book starts before the campaign and ends with the campaign, and Lucien is your perspective character for the whole thing. Not Molly, Lucien. It's wonderful. It is very well written. He is, I don't want to say he's wholly relatable, but I can absolutely see where the thought trails are going to make him into what he is. It is a single perspective. You are all in his head, and he is not always alone in there. Again, heed the spoiler warning from before. Everything is in his perspective, including scenes from the campaign. There are scenes, particularly in Isocross and Aor, where you would have seen it from the perspective of the Mighty Nine during the campaign, because obviously you're watching the Mighty Nine, and Matt was playing as Lucien, and he was the only one who knew what was going on in that man's head. But since this one is from Lucien's perspective, you're going to see some familiar scenes play out. So predetermined outcomes, but seeing his thought process during it. And because you're in his head, you can hear the voices too. This is where I think listening to it as an audiobook is superior to actually reading the text, which feels blasphemous coming from me. But I do think it works better. Even though, like, there are like text differentiations in the book. So you don't like completely lose it, but there's something really nice to it. There's something really nice to hearing it actually spoken in voice, and the voices overlapping, and it's really nice. Robbie and Matt, who do a lot of the heavy lifting there, do a wonderful job, and then Taliesin when he comes in. So, time skips forward. Almost all time skips are at chapter breaks, and sometimes I wish there was more about how we got from those points, because sometimes we skip from points D to G. However, with the exception of one very plot-relevant jump, it's never too confusing. There is a jump at, I think it's about the 2/3 mark, that does not mesh at all with where we left off. But if you know the campaign, or if you're willing to continue with the reading, it does explain why that jump was there. And if you know the campaign, you know exactly why that jump was there. If you don't like time jumping around, the good news is it almost always jumps forward. There's 1 or 2 flashbacks, but they are not typically flashbacks. They're either a dream sequence, or it is Lucien telling someone else a story. So it's very clearly his voice telling the story as opposed to him remembering a thing. And then it is fairly dark. Here's another spoiler warning. Lucien is one of your big bads in campaign 2. This is about what makes him the way he is, and he isn't pleasant, and being in his head is not always nice. It is very believable, and you can follow the train of thought that got him there. You can see how he went from the very beginning, where I want to earn enough money to go to my sister and not be poor, and then we can start a life together. And the slow slide and crumble that ends up with the Neo Sum Novum body horror, super powerful, monstrous creature that he is at the end. It feels like those two should not come from the same being, but it is a slow fall. It is, here's a bad decision, or here's a bad thing done for good reasons, or here is a half thought out thing, or there's a lot of little pieces, and a lot of small things happen and snowball, and there are paths in the road where they could have branched and been different, and he did not take those. I will say it is dark. You have, very early, you have this concept of hollowing, which is basically meat puppets. It's awful. The description of it is terrifying and awful and body horror, and then that's very early in the book, and then at the end you get to a whole nother kind of body horror that is very reminiscent of the meat puppets. You have blood magic mercenaries. Lucien is one of them who can practice this, but you've got thieves and villains, and you've got understandable characters, but none of them are good. And even the ones that are the closest to good aren't really good. They're just less dark. there are very much things in this that go bump in the night. There, how do I do this? So when Lucien begins to become more, when he begins to become the nonagon, there are creepy things that show up, both in his dreams and just straight up in the reading. There is a weirdness going on. Like his abilities are not kind or pleasant or fun, and like how it warps relationships is also a thing. It is the tale of a villain, and it is the tale of where is the line, and do you cross it, and what happens when you just sort of say, line, what line? And just stride out ahead of all of the lines and be like, there are no lines because I'm in charge. That is basically Lucien. He doesn't like hard rules, and that is very apparent very quickly. He very much expects the world to knock him down, but he also expects to be able to punch the world and get what he wants anyway. Or sweet talk it. Those are his two options. But it is fairly dark. I say that. It could be a lot worse, but as someone who doesn't read creepy stuff and someone who doesn't read or enjoy horror, this is on the darker end for me. It was never so much that I had to stop listening, and it was never so much that I wanted to flip mediums to the book, because I'm pretty sure that what my brain could come up with would sound way worse than what Robbie and Matt and the Critical Role cast and crew could do. Because that is one of those things about spooks and horror where sometimes the illusion of things and leaving gaps lets your mind fill in just how awful things can be. I was very thankful that there were fewer of those because it was an audiobook. So, recommendation. I have fewer this time than usual. But my recommendations for villain protagonist, Captain Hook, The Adventures of a Notorious Youth by J.B. Hart. I greatly enjoyed this book. It is Captain Hook before he's Captain Hook, but he is not a nice child. The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. And honestly, a lot of classics. Paradise Lost, Macbeth, Frankenstein. I looked it up. There are a bunch of classics that are villain protagonists. Wuthering Heights. I guess part of it is if I haven't. So I try to recommend books I've read. On these recommendation slides, I try to recommend books I've read, and sometimes telling you, hey, this is a villain protagonist, when it's not from like an established thing like Captain Hook, it's kind of it's a spoiler for the whole book. And sometimes in the modern era, people mistake non-heroic characters as villains. And by that, I mean there are characters who are morally gray, who do awful things, but that aren't technically villains. They are people. And that's not great. Like, I'll admit that. That's not great to think about, because that implies that all people have the potential to be morally gray and not great, you know, like people are. But there's been a lot of in more modern literature, if a character is not nice and a bit grumpy, and doesn't like come around to have a romance, B, a family, C, a dog, you know, all of these things that are seen as redeemable. If they just, the end of their arc is that they've still done questionable things and are grumpy, that doesn't make them a villain. Sometimes people are just people, and people are complicated, and that's just how people are. And books about people are about people. But the reason I didn't put a bunch of them up here is because the ones I have read that I know are villain protagonists, it kind of spoils the whole book. There's an entire, if you really want villain protagonist books, there's an entire Disney series that I think it's Hyperion, who is putting them out right now, is doing about like all of the Disney villains, like one after another. Go read those. There's another one that's the Twisted series, where they're taking the main characters and making them anti-heroes, I think, if not outright villains. Go read those. I can't really recommend them. I haven't read them myself, but if you're looking for obvious villain protagonists, there you go. And Fairly Dark. I've got two here because I don't read spooky things. Lockwood and Company, The Screaming Staircase by Jonathan Stroud. I've talked about this one before. It is the one about the child ghost hunter group. The spooky factor here, first of all, is really well written. Second of all, half of the spook is the fact that the adults can't see it, and therefore kids have to deal with it. And it's awful, because it's all the adults' fault anyways. And then American Gods by Neil Gaiman is dark in a different way. It is not dark in the traditional spooky factor. It is more dark in the fact of sometimes people do awful things. And isn't that dark? And how do we deal with that? And do we do awful things in response? And like, some of the gods are the problem, but mostly it's a book about people, even if most of those people are gods. So that is that. I highly recommend The Nine Eyes of Lucien. There we go. I greatly enjoyed it. I had a blast with it. As I said, I dearly love Molly Mock. I dearly love the Mighty Nine. This was a nice look at the beginnings of a very flawed character, who was flawed when he was introduced in the campaign, and like the beginning was also flawed. And then so when you meet Molly is flawed, and Molly is flawed because of these other reasons, but the person who was before was also flawed. And then later, when you meet Lucien in the actual campaign, Lucien is flawed, and here is how he became such. And it is such an easy to see path. There were multiple times where he could have taken a different turn, chosen something else, gone a different way, and maybe he still would have been dark and grim and awful, but he might have been awful in very different ways. But no, this is the way he chose. And I will say that is one of the most interesting parts of this book, is that it is always, almost always, Lucien's choice. And sometimes that is a choice of non-choice. Hey, you didn't choose to do otherwise, so these things happened. And you had the opportunity to choose otherwise. Not a matter of, oh, I didn't know there was another choice. It was just, oh, I didn't do these things because why should I? No one's ever helped me out. Why should I help anyone out? You know, that kind of wonderful stuff. But it is a nice, it's a really nice thing to do by audiobook. I will say I can still read faster than I can listen to these. But thanks to Robbie and Matt and all, the audiobook was a lot of fun. I'm going to say I enjoyed this one a lot more than Kith and Ken. Partially because Mighty Nine. Partially because Robbie wasn't alone for as much of it. Like, even though Kith and Ken technically had two different voice actors as main characters, as opposed to this one where poor Matt was doing a lot of heavy lifting. Overall, because Matt was Lucien, I'm pretty sure he was also Kree, and I think he was also Vestaragna. Like, he was all of these NPCs that he was in the campaign. So really, Robbie was voicing the newbies. Or the people we'd only heard about before, but never actually heard in the campaign. But it is a lot of fun. I highly recommend it. Go ahead and read it during spooky season. It has some nice spooks. It's got some real creepy stuff at the end, and some nice Mountains of Madness nonsense in the middle. In the last third. It's surprising. I will say this. I was very surprised how much of this book was normal. Because I came into it kind of knowing where Lucien ended and knowing that a little bit of how we got there, because I watched the campaign. Well, I listened to the campaign. So I'm like, okay, I know where we're gonna end. I didn't know that's where the book was ending, but I knew where Lucien's trajectory was. I didn't really know the start, but I knew the end. And then most of the book he is remarkably not like Mountains of Madness Cthulhu-esque nonsense crazy. Which I wasn't expecting. I guess I kind of always figured he was a very crazy charismatic from the beginning, and that's not really how it is. Charismatic, yes. Crazy, no. Lucien has the classic Greek flaw of hubris, and it's kind of glorious. Especially because what brings him down is never like the gods, like it is in most Greek plays. It's himself. But yeah, so that is a Critical Role of the Mighty Nine, the Nine Eyes of Lucien. And I will see you in 2 weeks for a very special spooky stream. Hope you have a good time.